Ajegunle was a place that breathed struggle. From dawn to dusk, its streets echoed with the sounds of survival, hawkers calling out prices, generators humming from makeshift stalls, danfos honking through impossible traffic, and children laughing barefoot through puddles that never seemed to dry. Life in Ajegunle wasn't easy, but it was alive. Among the people who called this place home was Adaora Nwankwo, a 24-year-old woman who carried her world on her slender shoulders. Orphaned in her teens, she had inherited not just responsibility, but a fierce determination to hold her small family together. Her younger brother, Chidi, only 17, looked up to her as mother, sister, and guardian, all rolled into one. Their tiny one-room apartment was crammed with 2 mattresses, a kerosene stove, a cracked mirror, and the memories of a life that used to be better, before illness took their mother and hardship became the norm. Adaora's days began before the first cock crowed. She would fetch water, sweep out her corner of the compound, and head to mile 2 to buy ingredients from the wholesale market. She cooked and sold rice, beans, and fried plantain at a small roadside stall she had built with Chidi using leftover wood and zinc sheets. The stall stood under a faded Coca-Cola umbrella, worn by sun and rain. Despite its humble appearance, it was a landmark to many. Her food was affordable, and her heart was generous. If you were hungry and broke, Adaora found a way to feed you anyway. But beyond the food, it was her spirit that made her unforgettable. She was the kind of woman who could calm a crying child with a lullaby, diffuse a quarrel with a few kind words, or help an elderly woman carry her bucket across a flooded street. Even when her own belly was empty, she found ways to give. Her guiding principle came from her late mother. Even if the world forgets you, don't forget to be good. Friday evenings were usually busy, but that particular night was slow. Dark clouds had gathered all afternoon, and by dusk, a heavy rain began to fall. The streets emptied quickly as people rushed to shelter. Adaora stayed under the umbrella, watching the water rise around her feet. She packed up her coolers, covering them with plastic bags, and counted the little money she had made. It wasn't much, just enough to buy more beans for the next day and maybe bread for breakfast. As she lifted the cooler onto her head, she noticed something odd near the edge of the gutter. A shape, a person. Her eyes narrowed through the curtain of rain, and her heart dropped. There, half submerged and lying dangerously close to the rushing water, was a man, unmoving, blood staining the side of his face, his white shirt soaked and torn. Without thinking, she dropped her cooler and ran to him. Passers-by stared but didn't stop. Some mumbled suspicions. "Maybe he's drunk," someone said, "or one of those criminals who got beaten." But Adaora didn't listen. She knelt beside him, shivering from the cold, and gently turned his face toward her. His skin was clammy. His breathing was shallow. He was still alive. She flagged down a passing keke napep, begging the reluctant driver to help her. He grumbled but agreed when she waved the last of her earnings in his face. Together, they lifted the unconscious man into the tricycle, and she held him tightly all the way to a small private clinic a few streets away. The clinic was modest, 2 nurses, a retired doctor, and barely enough equipment, but it was familiar to her. She had brought Chidi here once when he had typhoid. The nurses hesitated, wary of treating a man they didn't know, but Adaora pleaded, offering her name, promising to stay, assuring them that he wouldn't be trouble. They relented. For hours she waited in the dimly lit corridor, soaked to the bone, refusing to leave. She had no umbrella, no change of clothes, and no phone to call anyone. The nurses eventually brought her a wrapper to warm herself. She sat curled on a plastic chair, dozing off between prayers and worry. The man was cleaned up, his wounds treated. They said he had a concussion and bruises, likely from a fall or an attack. His watch was designer, his shoes foreign, his wallet missing. He was clearly someone of means, but at that moment, he was just a stranger who needed help. And to Adaora, that was enough. By morning, when they told her he would survive, she smiled in relief. Quietly, without waiting for thanks or recognition, she left the wrapper on the chair and slipped out of the clinic into the early morning drizzle. She returned to Ajegunle and resumed her life. She bought fewer beans that morning and cooked less food. Her earnings were gone, and she had no idea how she would make it through the next week. But in her heart, she felt peace. She had done the right thing. What she didn't know, what no one in Ajegunle could have guessed, was that the man she saved was Chief Damilola Adebayo, a reclusive billionaire and CEO of Hexacore Systems, one of Nigeria's most powerful fintech empires. In that moment of selfless action, Adaora's life had unknowingly collided with destiny. And though the wheels of fate turned slowly, they had begun to turn indeed. The sterile scent of antiseptic filled the room when Chief Damilola Adebayo opened his eyes. It took him several moments to remember who he was, and even longer to realize where he was. His head pounded, a dull ache radiating from the stitches on his temple, and his chest burned each time he inhaled too deeply. For a man used to the control of boardrooms, bulletproof vehicles, and high-rise meetings in Victoria Island, this frailty felt foreign. He had been found near unconsciousness in a gutter in Ajegunle, a place he hadn't set foot in since his university outreach days. In the chaos of the attempted carjacking, he'd fought, fled, and fallen. It was nothing short of a miracle that he was alive. But what puzzled him most was the story he was told by the nurse. A young woman had brought him in. She had no name, no agenda. She had paid for his transport and stayed until they confirmed he was stable, then disappeared without a trace. The news made its way quickly into the elite circles of Lagos. Journalists speculated. Social media flared with theories. But the truth of the event remained largely unknown. Damilola refused interviews, ignored PR managers who begged him to use the moment. He wasn't interested in optics. Something had changed in him that night. Something deep. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman. She had saved him. Not because of who he was. She didn't even know. She saw a broken man, and she helped him. For days after being discharged, Damilola couldn't focus on work. His aides noticed. His business partner called it post-trauma distraction. But he knew better. He didn't just want to thank her. He needed to. The idea of someone living a hard life, giving the little they had for a stranger, unsettled him in ways he couldn't explain. So he started looking. But how do you find a woman with no name in one of Lagos's most densely populated districts? He sent his head of security Idris with a vague description. Mid-20s, slender, dark-skinned, wears her hair in short twists, possibly a food vendor. Idris frowned but didn't question it. The team scouted clinics near Ajegunle and followed word-of-mouth rumors. Nothing turned up for a while. It was an old woman who finally gave them a lead. She remembered a girl matching the description who sold rice and beans at the junction near the Owando station. "Very nice girl," the woman had said, "always giving extra meat to small pekin." And just like that, they found her. When Damilola first saw her again, he didn't approach. He stayed in his vehicle, a low-profile, unmarked black SUV, and watched her work. She moved with the confidence of someone used to being unseen. She laughed with the children, scolded a teenager who tried to skip the queue, and wiped her brow with the back of her wrist like she'd been doing it all her life. There was no doubt it was her. The next day, he returned, this time stepping out of the SUV. His designer slippers tapped lightly on the uneven pavement as he walked toward her stall. People turned and whispered, but Adaora kept dishing food, unaware of the eyes watching her. When she finally looked up and saw him, she froze. Her face shifted between confusion and disbelief. She had seen his face on the news, but never imagined the man she pulled from the gutter was one of the richest men in Nigeria. He spoke to her gently, humbly. There were no cameras, no entourage. He came alone, just a man seeking the woman who saved him. Over the next few weeks, he kept returning. At first, he bought food, not because he needed to, but because it gave him a reason to be near her. They didn't talk much, but he observed. Her kindness was consistent. She treated him no differently than she treated others. That intrigued him. In his world, everyone wanted something, but Adaora expected nothing. Eventually, he asked her out for a walk, just around the area. She hesitated, but agreed. They strolled past wooden stalls, crossed narrow bridges over dirty canals, and talked about simple things: music, food, growing up in Nigeria. She didn't ask him about his money. She never mentioned his fame. She saw a man, not a brand. Damilola found himself looking forward to those quiet visits. He began to understand that despite their vastly different worlds, she had something he lacked: inner peace. Her life was difficult, yet she walked through it with grace. When his executive assistant warned that his regular disappearances were causing tension among shareholders, he laughed for the first time in weeks. He didn't care. For once, he was doing something that wasn't strategic. It was sincere. Of course, not everyone was pleased. When word reached his mother, a proud, dignified woman from a long line of Lagos elites, she was horrified. The idea that her son, the face of a multi-billionaire empire, was mingling with a roadside food vendor? It was scandalous. She called him repeatedly, voicing her disapproval in veiled tones of concern. But Damilola had made up his mind. This wasn't about rebellion or charity. It was about someone who had shown him a kind of love that money couldn't buy. And Adaora? She remained unsure of what to make of it all. Her friends whispered. Some warned her he was playing a game. Others dreamed of how she might cash out. But Adaora wasn't moved. She had lived long enough to know that people wore masks. And even now, with Damilola showing genuine interest, she kept her guard up. Not because she didn't trust him, but because life had taught her not to expect miracles. Still, something was growing between them. It was quiet. It was patient. But it was real. The blossoming relationship between Adaora and Damilola did not follow the rhythm of a fairy tale. It grew slowly, like a stubborn seed pushing through hard, dry soil. They came from different worlds, one of polished floors and silent air conditioning, the other of muddy streets and diesel fumes, yet something unspoken kept pulling them toward each other. Damilola began showing up more often in Ajegunle, not in his luxury SUVs or with his high-powered team, but alone, in casual wear, sunglasses tucked into his pocket, wearing the kind of slippers that wouldn't draw attention. His presence became almost normal in the neighborhood. Children who once stared in awe now greeted him with ease. The old women started offering him blessings, sensing something genuine in his intentions. But with every step closer to Adaora, the gap between their realities stretched tighter. In his world, people whispered behind closed doors. At the company, his board grew restless. His assistant, Taupe, began scheduling fewer media appearances, subtly steering his calendar back toward corporate image building. Even his business partners overseas started raising eyebrows. Investors worried. A CEO wandering through slums for reasons that had nothing to do with profit? Unheard of. And then there was his mother, Madame Remilekun Adebayo, the matriarch of the Adebayo dynasty, respected in Lagos society, feared in business, and known for her poise. She did not take the news well. She had tolerated many things, but a relationship with a roadside food seller from Ajegunle was beneath the family name. When Damilola finally introduced Adaora to her in a formal setting, the tension was almost unbearable. The meeting took place in the Adebayo mansion in Ikoyi. The compound itself felt like a different country. Marble floors, glass chandeliers, manicured lawns that stretched farther than Adaora could walk in 5 minutes. The air smelled like imported roses and old money. Adaora arrived in her finest wrapper and gel, her posture straight, her heart racing. She had never felt so out of place, and yet she refused to shrink. She had fed people with her bare hands, educated children with no books, and survived in a world where softness was often punished. She would not cower now. Remila-kun was cold but courteous. She asked carefully crafted questions about Adaora's upbringing, her education, her ambitions. The answers were sincere, but the disapproval in her eyes never faded. As Adaora left the mansion that day, she knew the road ahead would be harder than she had imagined. Back in Ajegunle, life continued. Her neighbors gossiped with curiosity and envy. Some were supportive, calling her our queen. Others rolled their eyes, convinced the rich man would soon disappear, leaving her with nothing but regret. Adaora listened to it all, but she focused on what she could control, herself. Despite her growing closeness with Damilola, she never accepted money from him, not directly, not through gifts. When he offered to upgrade her food stall, she thanked him but declined. When he brought her a new phone, she returned it. What she offered him was not for sale. And it was this very refusal, this defiance of the rules his world operated on, that made Damilola fall even deeper for her. He began bringing her into his world, bit by bit. Not to change her, but to expose her to what he saw every day. He took her to tech expos, invited her to private presentations, asked her opinion on things no one in his team dared challenge. And to his surprise, her insight was sharp. She questioned things others accepted. She looked at systems not from the lens of profit, but from how they impacted real people. One evening, while discussing a proposed digital loan platform, she raised a point that silenced an entire boardroom. Have you ever asked how a woman who sells vegetables with no smartphone will repay you weekly if she must first borrow to even buy data? Damilola realized that while his empire was built with innovation, it lacked connection. Adaora brought that connection. Slowly, he started reshaping company policies, pushing for products that served the truly underserved. His executives struggled at first, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Hexacore's reach widened as they bridged digital divides with real-world empathy. But the changes in his business were only part of the transformation. His personal life changed, too. He no longer needed lavish events to feel important. He found more joy in sharing suya under a shed with Adaora than in fine dining atop hotel rooftops. The noise of status, class, and wealth quieted in her presence. Still, they faced storms. One afternoon, a gossip blog leaked photos of Adaora and Damilola walking hand in hand through a local market. The headline read, "Billionaire CEO dating Ajegunle food seller. Is this love or PR stunt?" The internet erupted. Memes flew. Critics called it a phase. Some praised him. Others insulted her. Adaora didn't flinch. She was used to judgment. But Damilola, for all his success, had never been under fire this personal. For once, he wasn't being attacked for a business deal. It was his heart on trial. They talked late into the night about what lay ahead. Adaora told him she would not beg to belong. If he wanted her, he had to want all of her, her past, her neighborhood, her story. No upgrades, no rebranding. He listened. He agreed. And it was then, under the glow of an Ajegunle streetlight, that Damilola realized he wasn't just in love. He had been changed, not by force, not by ambition, but by the quiet, relentless grace of a woman who gave without taking, who lifted without asking, and who reminded him that sometimes the richest people were not those with power, but those who had the courage to stay kind, even when the world gave them nothing. The proposal did not come with cameras, nor was it delivered on the terrace of some sky-high luxury hotel overlooking the Lagos Lagoon. There was no string quartet, no expensive champagne. Instead, it happened in a place far more meaningful, on the rooftop of the modest clinic in Ajegunle, where Adaora had once waited, soaked to the bone, for a stranger to live. Damilola had asked the clinic staff for permission. He wanted to stand exactly where her story met his, where death had knocked, and Adaora had answered not with fear, but with compassion. He arrived that morning dressed simply, not in the polished attire of a CEO, but in a clean native Ankara buba and trousers. He held no speech, only a small box, and a gaze full of meaning. When Adaora stepped out onto the rooftop, guided by one of the nurses, she stopped in her tracks. The sun was rising gently behind the city skyline, casting golden light across the familiar streets below. In front of her stood the man she had once lifted from a gutter, now on one knee, offering a ring that glittered only slightly less than the quiet hope in his eyes. He didn't promise wealth or comfort, those she could have taken long ago if she wanted. What he offered was his heart, his name, his life, and she, with tears rolling down her cheeks and a smile soft as dawn, nodded before words even left her mouth. News of their engagement spread quickly. Some people rejoiced, others speculated. The media did what it always did. It tried to dissect love, quantify kindness, and wrap it in language palatable for headlines. But those closest to the couple knew. This was not a publicity stunt, nor a Cinderella story. This was something else, something quieter, more powerful. Preparations began soon after. The wedding was set for December, in dry season, under clear skies. Damilola's family wanted a grand ceremony in Victoria Island, complete with senators and ambassadors and oil tycoons. But he declined respectfully. His bride would not be erased by opulence. So instead, the main ceremony was held in Ajegunle, on an open field near the market where Adaora had sold food for years. The space was transformed, decorated with marigold fabric, woven raffia mats, and local flowers. A blend of cultures came alive. Yoruba drums throbbed with energy, while Adaora's Igbo relatives danced with joy, ululating as she walked in, regal in her gold and red wrapper. Her galum was tied high, her neck adorned with coral beads. She carried herself like the queen she always was, not because of who she was marrying, but because of who she had always been. Chidi stood proudly at her side, now a university student thanks to a scholarship Damilola had arranged quietly. The entire community turned out, from children she once taught, to customers who had sat by her food stall, to women who had whispered prayers for her in secret. They cheered, they danced, and some cried openly. The reception later took place at a garden in Lekki, more intimate, where Damilola's corporate associates mingled awkwardly with Adaora's old neighbors. But somehow, the mix felt right. It was a union not just of two people, but of two worlds, one shaped by power, the other by persistence. Marriage brought change, as it always does. Adaora moved into Damilola's home in Ikoyi, though she insisted on maintaining her connection with Ajegunle. Within weeks, she turned a section of the estate into a community planning hub. With Damilola's support, she founded the Adaora Initiative, a foundation focused on education and micro-support for women-led businesses in underdeveloped areas. But Adaora didn't become a figurehead. She was involved in every detail. She visited markets. She sat on plastic stools, listening to traders' struggles. She redesigned learning programs with teachers who had no blackboards, only chalk and hope. She refused to lose touch. Damilola, now a changed man, watched in awe. He had spent years building systems and structures, but she built trust. He offered technology. She added humanity. Together, they created a hybrid model of business and compassion. For the first time, Hexacore's slogan, "Innovation for Everyone," actually began to mean something. Of course, life wasn't perfect. There were still critics. Anonymous letters arrived at their home. People said she was too visible, too opinionated, too involved. They called her the charity wife, as if that was an insult. But Adayora never wavered. She knew who she was. Her roots were deep. On their first wedding anniversary, Damalola took her back to her old stall in Ajegunle. It had long since been dismantled, replaced with a paved road and a small library her foundation had helped build. But the memories remained. They stood there together. No security detail. Just two people wrapped in quiet memory. Damalola looked at her then, his once perfectly manicured fingers now comfortably calloused from work beyond boardrooms, and he smiled. She had changed his world, not with wealth, not with influence, but with rice, beans, and plantain, with kindness, wrapped in nylon bags and passed through iron pots, with lessons taught under mango trees and faith carried in a plastic bucket. In her, he found more than love. He found redemption. And she didn't need a crown. She had one already. Invisible, yes, but worn proudly, shaped by sweat, service, and sincerity. In the end, the girl from Ajegunle, who once knelt in the rain to help a stranger, became the woman who ruled beside him. Not because she had changed who she was, but because the world had finally caught up to see who she had always been.